Okay, so my name is Maya Aronson, and I'm here with my lovely grandmother. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Maya's grandma and very happy that she's here today with me.
Perfect. Yeah, so we're going to do a little interview today, and I'll just start with a little introduction for where this idea came to be. Basically, my grandmother is a very wise woman. She has a lot of things, a lot of knowledge to give to the world, in my opinion, at least. And she's also written a book. I mean, it's been in the works for a long time, right? How long have you been
It's
percolating
been
this
out
book?
there for over 10, 15 years.
Yes. But the thoughts in the book have been there with you your whole life, your little spouts of philosophy and wisdom. And so we were having a conversation around the table with me and you and my mom. And we were just wondering like how to get this out there, how to get that information that's in the book and that's in your head out into the
I
world and
have
to
this.
more people.
This is the book.
Yeah, perfect. There it is. One lifetime, two lives. And we'll get into what that means. I'm going to do a little interview, and this interview is titled The Philosophy of a Jewish Saint. And that is what my mom actually came up with as a name for my grandmother, and I think it's perfect, absolutely perfect, because my grandmother she's a lovely Jewish woman who has Jesus-like empathy for people who normal mortals might think don't deserve that amount of empathy at times. So, this is going to be a Jewish saint's practical guide to dealing with difficult people right here, right now. And that leads us to our first question, which is what is your secret to getting along with and empathizing with difficult people?
Well, it's kind of a long story, and the main thing is I live a double life. I actually have two lives that I live every day, and that really helps me deal with difficult people, and it helps me with a lot of other things too.
So, what are these double lives? What do you mean by that?
Well, the first time I became aware I was leading a double life was when I was in high school study hall. And I grew up in a very loving family, but I grew up with mental illness in the family. And the night before had been one of really emotional upheaval. And I was sitting in study hall and I was so upset. I was just in my little world suffering. And I happened to look outside and I saw it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and these beautiful pink blossoms were like outside the window. They were so beautiful. And suddenly I realized I was leading a double life. On the one hand, I was completely absorbed in my little life, completely miserable. And here the whole world was going on, and I didn't want to miss it. So I just felt that suddenly that I had two lives to live, and my personal little life could not be the only life that I was going to go forward with.
Right. And so I've heard you say it before. That's why I'm just asking this extra little question. But but it's like you have one life on the ground where you are. And how can we talk about the two lives to distinguish them? Do you have words
Yeah,
for those?
I have a personal life, Evelyn Aronson. This is me with my granddaughter and my regular family. But on the other hand, I'm a spectator. My second life, I am a spectator. And I can look at the world objectively. It's kind of like a godlike view. You just observe what's going on, take your personal self out. And life is always interesting out there, even though my own life is not always beautiful, but the world is beautiful and it's always interesting.
Mm. So can you give us some other examples of how this spectator has come into your life?
Well, one thing that I remember is when I was older and I was dating somebody. And I got one of those like Dear Jane calls, I said, "Oh, you're a lovely girl, but you're just not for me." And I started, like tearing up and all of a sudden I realized I was watching myself tear up. And it was such an interesting process to watch myself. And I was just getting a real insight into human nature. But then I I realized though, if this was the love of my life, you can't be a spectator when your life is immediately involved. You can only be a spectator when you have time to get distance. So I know that I would not have had that interesting observation if this had been the love of my life.
But the spectator seems to be a helpful character in certain instances. It like helps you get perspective.
It
Is that right?
helps. Absolutely. It helps me step away, take myself out of the picture so I can see more objectively what's really going on. And it was so interesting to observe human nature, how all of a sudden the tears are welling up and I'm feeling, and I was actually like watching a movie, just watching human nature in action. And it was really fascinating.
I love it. Do you have another example of this double life?
Yes, I do. You have to excuse me. I have little notes here because I want to
Go
say
for it.
things right. And this one has to do with marital politics. Um, my husband and I had a 60 plus year of, I would say, a very happy marriage. And one issue came up for no apparent reason. The toilet started to gurgle. And, I would jiggle it. The next day, I'd have to jiggle it a little longer. So finally, because we had a division of labor, I went to my husband. I said, "Honey, something's wrong with the toilet. It's jiggling and I can't get it to stop." So, he goes to work. And after a while, I go to use the bathroom again and the toilet's still jiggling. And I tell him, "Honey, it's still not working right. Something's wrong." And then he goes and he tinkers a little more. And then finally, I ask him again, and he's had it, and he explodes. "Don't you know how to flush a damn toilet?" And so I I started, women always think that they're doing something wrong. So I started thinking like, "Well, maybe I didn't flush the toilet right. I didn't know how." And then I realized that I know how to flush a toilet. And that I got very angry. What's he yelling at me for? I was very, very upset with him. And he was upset with me. And we went into our corners. Like when my husband was upset, he would always go, I call into his cave, go into the bedroom, close the door, maybe go to sleep. And I would be downstairs ruminating, "Oh my gosh, I wish we didn't have this fight. How are we going to resolve it?" and everything. Anyway, fortunately, I had read a book, and that book was called "Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus" by John Gray, PhD. And I want to quote what he said. "Martians value power, competency, efficiency, and achievement. They are always doing things to prove themselves and develop their power and skills. Their sense of self is defined through their ability to achieve results. They experience fulfillment primarily through success and accomplishment." Armed with this wisdom, I approached my usually mild-mannered partner and I asked simply, this was hours after we had time to calm down, "Do you feel bad you couldn't fix the toilet, honey?" And he said, "You're damn right." And then we both began to laugh because he had read Dr. Gray's book too. So on the personal level, my spectator now is going to do an analysis. Okay. On the personal level, I was deeply hurt and I felt the innocent victim of senseless anger. I wanted revenge. But what happened after quite a while is that my spectator self took over and realized what was happening. In this case, I saw Dr. Gray's man from Mars trying to solve my problem, but facing defeat. His ensuing frustration led to his anger, and his anger was naturally projected onto your wife. So I have found that when I'm able to eliminate myself from the situation, when I take advantage of what I call my double life, I can often see where my husband is really coming from. And then the anger kind of dissolves. Sometimes I even feel sorry for him. And in the best case scenario, I feel like giving him a cuddle. But not before he's had a chance to go into his cave and calm down. Really has helped me in our marriage, seriously. When I can take myself out and I see where he's coming from, they say
Yeah.
put yourself in someone else's shoes, but it really, really helped a lot in our marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good example. And I think that ties really well back to the original question
Yeah.
about how did this spectator help you?
Right.
But before we get into that, where did this come from, this idea? Like what's the basis of this double life idea? When did you start thinking about it? And yeah, does everyone have it?
Well, for me, it really goes back. Ever look at a small baby and they have these big bright eyes and they're looking around and they're taking in what is this marvelous big world that we out there, this intense curiosity. And they look up, they look down, they look all around with intense curiosity, trying to make sense of it. And I call that being a total spectator. And this is where the story of our double life begins. But now that little baby is lacking something we all have big time. And that is a well-developed ego. As the ego develops, the focus changes from the big universal picture, trying to figure out this wonderful world around us, into smaller picture of our own individual lives. And the big picture kind of gets smaller and the little picture gets bigger. And somewhere along the line, most of us forget about the big picture. We forget to take advantage of what a wonderful world. I got to figure it out. It's so fascinating. And somehow we forget that. And so ever since I became aware that I was living these two lives in that study hall a long time ago, I find myself working hard to stay connected to that big picture, to looking up and down and all around and trying to be a total spectator without letting my personal stuff get in the way. It's not easy. It's really hard to do sometimes, especially when your life is involved in lots of troubles and challenges. The goal is to be able to go back and forth between the two lives. And when I'm successful in looking at my personal life from the perspective of my second life, when I go back and forth, my personal life gets much richer. Like when I realized how I was reacting to that Dear Jane call. And so I named my life, my big picture life, the engaged spectator, because I can engage it in making my personal life better, more rewarding.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So we've already kind of gotten a hint and some examples, especially from the marital politics story you told about how this engaged spectator actually helps you in your life, dealing with difficult people, helping you to empathize, help rid yourself of that ego, as you say. So get a little bit more into that. How does this secret weapon help you dealing with difficult people that maybe many other people would not be so kind to deal with for as long as you do? How does that work?
Well, I will tell you about Karen. Karen was a teacher I worked with for many years, and she was very, very difficult to work with. She's the kind of person like if you say, "Have a nice day," she'd say, "Don't tell me what to do." So she could be really mean. She'd say black before I finished saying white. So I soon formed a very negative opinion of her. I really wanted nothing to do with her. And our interaction would be very tense, confrontational. And I joined the other teachers in a very general dislike. But what happened after a while, I started knowing more about her. And it turns out that I shifted from looking at Karen as a fellow teacher, I looked at her as a spectator, and the anger kind of filtered out. And I came to a surprisingly different conclusion. Rather than blame, I started feeling more compassion. Actually, she was very insecure. She suffered from a chronic illness that had bothered her for a long time since she was a teenager. She had very bad experiences with the opposite sex. She was not confident in her personal appearance. So, in order to feel important, she seemed to need to put other people down. From the blame mode, once I kind of looked at her differently, instead of blaming her, I felt kind of like empathy and tried to understand her better. And gradually, as she became more accepted by me, she let down some of her defenses. And I saw underneath, she's really a very nice, sweet person. And after a while, I actually became a good friend and her confidant. That didn't mean that in the work situation, she wasn't difficult and I had trouble. If I had to, I confronted her. But more importantly, I didn't take what she did to me personally. She was not reacting to my actions, but in line with her own needs and defenses. So long after I stopped teaching, we remained very good friends. But once I took myself out of it and I realized her actions were due to her own needs, her own defenses. So that's why I wanted to tell you about Karen, because I think she would be in the category of very difficult people. But after a while, my engaged spectator came to the rescue. I switched from the blame mode to the big picture, which is not easy when someone's upsetting you. But I guess that's where all the years, what I call mental exercising, comes in. You have to try hard to use your mental muscles to switch from the blame mode, from viewing Karen from my personal perspective and seeing her as my spectator self would. Observing, just trying to understand, taking my personal self out of the equation. And once I can do that, it seems to work. Sometimes it's very hard, depending on how difficult the person is. And sometimes it takes me a long time and tremendous effort. But eventually, I do get to the point where I don't blame them, I understand them, and I respect them because life is tough. And we all do the best that we can. And we all need to be understood and accepted. Actually, that's a universal need for all of us. Some of us, depending on our personalities, have trouble finding that empathy, that understanding, and they just deal with a lot of blame. And that's how I
Wow.
handled Karen.
Well, that's really cool. I just have one last little question Because you say it can be really difficult, and I totally can imagine it's really difficult, especially when you're going through something really heartbreaking, or when you're infuriated and you feel like something is unjust or unfair. And do you have any tips? What do you do in those moments? Do you take a walk? Do you get distance? Do you reason with yourself? Do you read, trying to get more information on the person? Like, what are some tangible things that people can do to get access or engage that spectator?
That's a great question, honey. And first of all, you can't do it in the heat. Your main principle is, to me, try not to act when you're angry, because anger is a very, very natural response. So I get angry and I get upset and I feel like lashing out. And so I'm not a saint. I'm a human being, and I have guilt and I have anger and resentment. My only salvation is if I wait a while. I wait a while and I just try and go into my space, but you can't do it all the time. And if the situation is very devastating, it can take a long, long time. But the point is, try not to act when you're in that state. Wait till the blame and the anger goes away. So I have to go back and I get into my spectator mode and I try and understand why the person is acting like that. And actually, I have another part that I've been working on lately. It's a technique for really trying to understand a human being. I call it my Sherlock Holmes investigation technique. And I would like at some time to share that because it does help me to get a better understanding of human nature. Does that help? Because
Yeah.
anger is healthy and it's desirable, but it's not a good place to act from. Gets you in a
Mm,
lot of trouble.
mm, yeah. No, that's really good. It's like move through the feelings and emotions that come up.
Absolutely. And if it's
And
really
it's like you
serious,
can't really step into the spectator unless you've kind of moved through
right,
that.
it's
Yeah.
very important. But don't forget that the spectator is there and it can help you. It can help you get through it, calm you down, but it has to
Mhm.
wait. It's not always accessible. Does that
Right.
explain it now? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That was so great.
I just want to
Yeah.
say that I think there's that spectator can do three main things. First of all, in the study hall, it made me realize that no matter how bad your life is, circumstances are, life is always beautiful. And you
Mm.
always can be grateful for the gift of life, and and the awe of the whole life process. It's always there. And the second thing with the Dear Jane, the specter helps you understand human nature. And the more we understand it, it's very complicated. And hopefully we can understand our own human nature and deal with it in a better way. And the third thing is, as my granddaughter says, it helps me to deal with difficult people. And most people are difficult. We're all difficult to different degrees. Yeah.
So true. That was a perfect summary, I think. This was the perfect introduction into the life of the spectator, the double lives, how to do it. And maybe next time we'll focus more on the practicalities of how to integrate this into your everyday life. From my little wisdom keeper grandmother. Was there anything you wanted to say?
Yes, I want to thank my granddaughter for being
Oh,
so wonderful and so supportive and just so you. Thank you, Maya.
Oh, thank you.